I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah. That is what I heard them say way back in the day. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, yeah, we have sorely changed. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. That is what I heard them say, yeah. Way back in the day. I'll be buried in my grave, yeah, before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, yeah, we have sorely changed. Whoa. Hey, hey. Whoa, oh, 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 whoa, oh, 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 oh.
And now, live from beautiful Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, you're watching My Fellow Americans with your host, Spike
Yes!
Cohen.
Yes, it's me. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, please. Oh, thank you so much. Keep clapping. Clap for the miracle. How would we know that you wanted the miracle if you didn't keep clapping? Welcome to My Fellow Americans. I am literally Spike Cohen. I'm so glad to have you here with me tonight. Have we got a show for you? It's called My Fellow Americans. It's this show. This is also the first episode, by the way, of My Fellow Americans during Gay Pride Month. And so I'd just like to take an opportunity to say to all my LGBT followers, I'm proud of you. You did it. Great job. This is a Muddied Waters Media production. Check us out on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Periscope, Anchor, iTunes, Google Play. Check us out everywhere. Give us 5-star reviews everywhere. If the reviews go higher than 5 stars, give us the absolute highest everywhere. Review us everywhere. Share this video right now. I want you to turn to your neighbor and say, neighbor, I have a roughly hour-long libertarian podcast that I want to share with you on a Wednesday evening. Be sure to give the gift of Spike Cohen today. Kids absolutely love it every single time. This program is brought to you by Anchor FM, and I will be plugging that later, roughly halfway through this program, probably at a very inappropriate moment. The intro and outro music to this and every episode of My Fellow Americans comes from the amazing and talented Mr. Joe Davi. That is Jodavi. Check him out on Facebook, SoundCloud. Go to his Bandcamp. It's jodavimusic.bandcamp.com. Buy his entire discography. It's like $15. You buy his music. He makes more music than you can buy that music. It's amazing. He's an incredible artist. Be sure to support him. Thank you so much, Mr. Joe Davi. I'd like to thank Kroger for this delicious, purified drinking water that I drink on this and every single episode of My Fellow Americans. That is delicious, delicious water. Thank you so much. Shout out to Tehran Turks' mom, as always. Guys, before I introduce my guest tonight, I'd like to take a moment to talk about something that has absolutely outraged me and something that I think that if left unaddressed will tear the very fabric of this nation apart. You see, I was recently at Denny's with my wife, and I was just looking at the menu like a normal person. I'm looking at the menu, everything looks fine, and then I see this. Look at that. I'll let you look a little closer. Look at that. Now, to the untrained eye, you may be thinking, what's the problem here? There's no problem. I'd see wild Alaskan salmon. Okay, this is not wild Alaskan salmon. Look at that. That is what they call wild Alaskan salmon, which they are selling for $11. Wild Alaskan salmon, which looks like this, $11 for this, which is supposed to be wild Alaskan salmon. Now, let me explain why this is a lie and why you should be as outraged as me. First of all, that's not what wild Alaskan salmon looks like. Okay, let's just be clear. That's not even what salmon looks like. And salmon isn't white. Salmon is pink. And wild Alaskan salmon is red. That's why people get it, because it's red and it tastes amazing. It is the best thing. I eat it almost every day. And it is amazing. That is not wild Alaskan salmon. And if it was wild Alaskan salmon, there was no way that they could sell it at that price point. You can't sell wild Alaskan salmon for $11.39. You can sell this, whatever this is, for $11.39. That could be chicken. I don't know what that is, but you could sell that for $11.39 easily. I don't know what it is. I don't want it, but you could definitely sell it for that much. But definitely not actual wild Alaskan salmon. Not whatever that is. Yes. Okay. Here's the real problem, and this is what makes me the most upset. You're Denny's. You are Denny's. Okay. No one is coming and expecting wild Alaskan salmon on the menu. All right? They're coming late at night. They're expecting breakfast food, maybe like a quesadilla or chicken fingers. Half of them are intoxicated. Claiming that you have wild Alaskan salmon on your menu provides absolutely no value for you or for the customer. This is just lying for the sake of lying. It accomplishes absolutely nothing. And I just stop the lies, Denny's. Just stop the damn lies. Just stop it. Guys, now I'd like to introduce my guest. My guest tonight is a world-renowned author, speaker, activist, and recently a podcaster as well. She got her start in politics back in college, where she started a pro-Israel advocacy group. She went on to become a director at Jerusalem U. She's been featured in the Wall Street Journal, where she was a Robert L. Bartley Fellow. This is the fancy show. We're having a fancy show today, okay? Robert L. Bartley Fellow, Wall Street Journal. She was also featured on New York Times, The Atlantic, Tablet, Prager University, The Times of Israel, and many other publications. She is currently the creator of The Theory of Enchantment, which is a lecture series and a framework of conflict resolution and interpersonal growth rooted in themes found in pop culture. Here's a quick promo about The Theory of Enchantment.
So here are the 3 principles, very simple. Number 1, remember that we are human beings, not political abstractions. Number 2, if you want to criticize someone whose behavior you find bad or problematic, criticize in order to uplift and empower, never to tear down, never to destroy. And number 3, everything we do, we want to root in love and compassion.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to my fellow Americans, the amazing and talented Ms. Chloé Valdary. Chloé, thank you so much for coming to My Fellow Americans.
Thank you for having me.
I have had the pleasure, the honor, if you will, of watching you bloom from an awkward little foal into the beautiful, graceful, elegant lady stallion that I see before me today.
I appreciate that, Spike. Really
You're welcome. And guys, be sure to comment with any questions or thoughts that you have, and Chloé and I will tell you if you are right or wrong. Now, Chloé, the first thing I always ask new guests when they come on is how you would describe your political beliefs. And would you say that you kind of got there as kind of an aha moment, or was sort of a gradual evolution over time?
So I think I'm at the point in my life where I don't really like to engage in politics.
Right.
So I guess that's like a way of exercising politics, is to not do it or not be engaged in it.
Right.
No, but there are political implications for what I do, obviously. But I would say my aha moment for sort of not wanting to exist exclusively or primarily within the realm of politics actually happened when I was in college. And it wasn't really an aha moment. It was more of a series of events, or sort of like an event that happened within a classroom that totally gave me anxiety and depression and made me rethink my entire world narrative.
Oh, wow.
So I took a class called Anthropology of Religion, Magic, and Witchcraft. And at that point, I had been super religious in a sort of dogmatic way. Mm-hmm. And I was taught and conditioned to believe that, if you acted a certain way or believed in a certain way, then you were sort of on my side. And if you didn't, then you were the enemy, right? And I saw you as the enemy, whatever that means. And I was in this class, and the professor was atheist and liberal. And so I had all these preconceived notions about her because I grew up in a pretty conservative home. And one time we had just seen Jesus Camp, which was a documentary about evangelicals. And there was another student in the class who was also atheist. And she attacked the evangelical community in that documentary. And then my atheist liberal professor actually defended the evangelicals depicted in that documentary.
Right.
And I had never seen anything like that. And that totally screwed me up because it screwed up my sense of sort of like the hero and villain, I guess, conceptualization of the world that I had.
Right.
And that forced me to rethink the narrative I had been running in my mind about what is good and what is bad. And I think that was the catalyst that paved the way for me to stop thinking in just like these big political abstractions and start really trying to think about the complexities and nuances of life and the non-zero sum game that life is. So I would say that was a huge moment for me.
So you've experienced a lot of distress at the thought that there was way more nuance to the world than you thought previously.
Yes.
Yeah,
it's a good way to think, but it's actually very stressful in the beginning.
Right. Now I remember this kind of speaks to what you were just talking about. I remember first finding out about you online, as I remember all things. It was January 6th of 2014, around 2:48 p.m. ish Eastern. This is, I don't know exactly when it was probably around that time though. It was around the time that you were making waves with your Zionist activism, the whole like, there's a black woman who's young and she's a Zionist. Yeah. And you also appeared, at least to me at the time, to be pretty conservative. Not necessarily Hannity-esque, but maybe Hannity adjacent. Maybe?
Sure, I'll take it.
Hannity adjacent. I get, whatever. Which honestly would have described me well too at the time. I was very conservative at the time. What would you like to say to 2014 Chloe right now?
That is a great question. Oh my God, that's like one of the best questions I've ever had. I don't think I would honestly change anything. I think that I had to go through the sort of, I had to go through the dogma, and I had to go through the like righteous indignation Chloe in order to come to the moment that I am now. So I wouldn't necessarily change anything I did, but I would tell that younger Chloe that there is more to this, that there will be more to discover about the world and about capital T truth. And that this may seem like the most pressing moment in your sort of, I guess, career. I was in college then, but I was also like working for various organizations, and so it may seem like the most pressing moment in your career, and you're sort of riding this wave where people are like praising you and things like that, but this is a journey, this is an intellectual journey, this is a philosophical journey that you're just now getting started on. And so like keep that in mind as you like speak in front of rallies and speak in front of
like don't take yourself too seriously with all this.
Yeah, like it's serious, but you'll discover that there are other serious things in life, and also not to take yourself so seriously in this moment. Right. Now,
I've asked that question before, and I was told that the correct answer is that you shouldn't say anything because that the grandfather paradox, and that collapses space and time or something like that.
That's like a quantum physics thing.
Your answer is I like your answer better because it's easier than someone being difficult and trying to explain quantum mechanics on the show and the paradox of time. But now let me ask you this. I think I know the answer to this. Do you still consider yourself a Zionist, or is that somewhat evolved as well?
I definitely still consider myself a Zionist, but even the way that manifests itself in my life is very different than the way it did in 2014. So.
Right. Now, scale of 1 to 10, how much do you really want to argue with me about Israel?
Like 0, honestly. You have to understand, like, if you would have asked me in 2014, I would have been like, let's do it.
Let's go. Yeah.
Now you might say something that I disagree with, and I'll just be like, well, you know what, Spike, I disagree with that. And I don't think that's going to be interesting for anyone.
It isn't going to be interesting. No, and I like, my whole thing is that, the things that people want to say about Israel, whether you agree with them or not, whether they're true or not, conversely, a lot of the things that you could want to say about Hamas.
Sure.
It's like which in my mind, and you can disagree with this, but it's almost like, okay, which bad actor are we picking here? And when I say Israel and Hamas, I'm not talking about individual people within it. I mean the people in the leadership positions who, in my mind, sometimes don't seem to care much about the people that it's affecting, similar to how it is here. But so yeah, no, we don't have to argue about that.
I don't think that's, like, again, 2019 me would say I don't think that's necessarily an unfair statement, but like I wouldn't even necessarily disagree with you, right? So
right.
Like then it really would be uninteresting.
It's just be us going like, yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. Yeah. People like, sometimes I try to be an alternative to the McLaughlin Group style of you're wrong.
I was actually raised watching that show, which is
really
crazy to think about, but yeah.
That's well. Then you know what I'm talking about.
My father was really into that show.
Yeah, McLaughlin Group, Morton Downey Jr. All of that stuff is just that might have been. That's probably before your time. That's before your time. He basically, so there's a segment where probably the most famous Morton Downey Jr. segment. This is pre Jerry Springer and all that. He would bring people on and call them idiots and stupid whiny liberals and like stuff like that. This was like groundbreaking. This was before even before CNN.
Ben Shapiro.
This is before Ben Shapiro was born, probably, and this was before any of the cable news networks. It was not like this, and certainly not from a conservative view. And one of my favorite skits or segments or whatever was Ron Paul was on there trying to explain to everyone why all drugs should be legal, and he was like telling people like, "Well, you're fat. Maybe we should make that illegal." Like that was the show. Was everyone just insulting each other? So I'm trying to be the opposite of that, but maybe not so much where it's just like us only just saying how like awesome and agreeable we are to each other. Right. Speaking of being agreeable, or I guess maybe not, the theory of enchantment. That's what you're doing right now. I've read all the stuff and I was listening to your podcast on it, and I don't want to spoil it, and so I'd rather you start with it. But I do want to ask you this: when you started this, what did you see that was missing in the public discourse, and how do you believe that theory of enchantment fills that void? And also, what is it even? Because no one even knows what I'm talking about yet.
Yeah. So, Theory of Enchantment is my startup. I decided to plunge into the world of entrepreneurship this year and create an LLC, found an LLC in January. So, Theory of Enchantment is really an educational consulting firm that provides a very unique curriculum to different sectors of society. So, whether it's individuals, organizations, companies. And it really teaches these sectors of society how to navigate, basically how to have better relationships with each other, how to communicate better. And all this contributes to mental health and wellness. It contributes to how we think about diversity. I always get this wrong when I try to say it. Diversity and inclusion departments should actually operate. It informs how we think a holistic society should look. And the reason why I wanted to create this was when I was working for Israel organizations, I was trying to essentially help Jewish students deal with anti-Semitism on college campuses and navigate that space. And what I discovered was that there's a lot of vocabulary in our culture about how to combat racism or how to combat prejudice, how to combat hatred, but there's hardly no vocabulary about how to actually love. And that's a skill set that requires a practice, that requires rewiring the brain to sort of look at individuals and groups and communities in different ways. And that really isn't being packaged in a way that's marketable to communities or to society as a whole. And I really wanted to provide that service because of that gap.
That's very interesting. So you think, you this came about because you think people are focusing too much on fighting the hate as opposed to saying, well, we could love instead of hate and present that as kind of a viable alternative. Right. And so the thing I always love to say is that combating hate is important, but it's actually not the same thing as learning how to love. And if you actually teach people how to learn how to love, that can, in the long run, end up combating the hate. But it's a very different thing to go to someone and say,
I hate you because you did this really aggressive, immoral thing. And so I'm just going to tell you I hate you. So I'm just going to be on my way. Like, that hasn't necessarily changed anything.
And I win. I win by telling you I hate you and I win. And then you walk away.
Right.
Yeah.
And that doesn't change anything. It's like, it's combating the hate in the sense that it's emotionally rewarding for you.
Right.
Tell that person,
Yes.
but it's not really combating the hate. Right.
Yeah. Right.
So there needs to be a discourse and a vocabulary and a set of practices that people and organizations and institutions can actually engage in that can bring about that better society.
That sounds good. So in the video we watched earlier, you laid out the 3 principles behind the theory of enchantment. For the people that are like me, who are severely ADD, maybe can we just break down a little bit what each of those principles are, and also on the face of it, I think hearing any of those things, I think most people would agree with them on their face. Where do you think it breaks down where it's not actually happening?
Sure. So 3 principles very quickly. Number 1, remember that we are human beings, not political abstractions. Number 2, criticize to uplift and empower, never to tear down, never to destroy. And number 3, root everything you do in love and compassion. Now, as you said, this sounds like common sense. Sounds like, well, obviously that's.
Well, yeah, of course, we're all humans, right?
Of course, we're not robots, Chloe. What do you mean? But actually, the first principle is the first principle because it's so critical, and because typically, especially in like spaces where there's political disagreement of a hyper-partisan nature, this entire principle gets thrown out of the window, and people don't realize that people come to form their own political opinions as a product of who they are as very complex human beings.
Yep.
Right? And the different things they value and the different things they ascribe meaning toward. And if
things they've experienced and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. All of that baggage, all of the things they grew up with, all of that complexity informs who they are today, right? And so to come to a person equipped with that knowledge and ready to speak to that person, aware of what makes up their complex selves, you're much more likely to be persuasive and relatable in getting your point across, as opposed to seeing that person as just an abstraction, a very pigeonholed stereotype that you can just assume things about, when in fact you know nothing about them and nothing about their life. Right. This isn't just about political disagreements. It's about disagreements of any nature, and it's also just about being able to navigate the human condition that we are forced with today, right? And so, yes, that first principle seems very obvious, but if you were to enroll in the curriculum that I built, what it breaks down into is actually learning what it means to be a human being. And what it means to be a human being is to, as I mentioned earlier, it means that you have all of these insecurities that you have to manage. You have feelings of vulnerability. How do you deal with feelings of vulnerability? How do you deal with feelings of inadequacy and incompetence? Yep. And how do you first understand the first principle as applied to the self? Because as it turns out, you can't be in relationship with other people if you don't have a healthy relationship with yourself. So once you learn how to apply it to the self, you can learn how to apply it to the other. And same for the second principle. Like, once you internalize the first principle, then this idea of criticizing in order to uplift and empower, not to tear down people, becomes almost second nature, because now you're equipped with this awareness of the idea of like people having internal worth or worthiness. And that also may sound cliche. That's something like that a lot of people were raised with, or a lot of people, or a few people on Twitter tell me they were raised with that, but it doesn't seem like it when you sort of engage in a lot of the discourses that we're having in society today. And
well, people will say, you know, I was raised, you know, to treat people like people, and to relate to their common experience. Not like these monsters out here, you know, these scumbags. We have to stop them from you know, spreading their intolerant ways. Anyway, go ahead.
Exactly that. It's funny you say that because, you know, there's an incredibly poignant film out, right? Or it's not a film, it's sort of like a series of episodes called When They See Us, which is a very difficult thing on Netflix to watch. But you should watch it because it's important. And I think one of the things it highlights is like the deleterious effects of the punitive system of our criminal justice system, and how it sort of rewards these sort of hyper prosecutorial I guess, outlooks on life and how that creates problems, especially for inner city communities and people of color. But what's so interesting about this is that, like, embedded within this sort of cultural phenomenon of a film is this idea that we should actually be combating the punitive nature of our criminal justice departments, and at the same time, we have people. This is the great irony to your point. We have people who are basically saying the punitive system is wrong, and so we need to totally destroy the prosecutor who prosecuted the kids.
We must punish them.
We must punish
the punishers.
That's an interesting flaw in the design system.
Right.
We understand what the film is supposed to make us do.
Yeah.
But we actually have to dig even deeper. It's proof that we haven't actually fully internalized the message of the film. Not truly, because it's like, on the one hand, we're like, the punitive system sucks, but let's do the punitive system as applied to, and we have to have a much more holistic, view of how we want to really implement ways of healing our society. It has to be. It can't be a zero-sum game. It can't be like we have to heal one community while like bashing another community. We have to approach it in a very holistic manner.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny because, as you know, I'm an anarchist, and in anarchist circles, there is a very interesting paradox that many of them have. Not all, but many of them have, where they're pretty in a very similar vein to what you were saying, where it's like, these people are controlling us, and they're, being violent, and they're trying to, force us into these things, and we have to stop them. We have to form together, and we have to take them and put them on trial, and then guillotine them. And I'm like, well, this sounds very suspiciously similar to what it is you are saying you're against. And we saw it with the French Revolution. We saw, and to some extent with the American Revolution, you saw, this resistance to injustice, which went from being sort of a defensive act into becoming a, what did Marx call it? A dictatorship of the proletariat, where the abusers the abused become the abusers and vice versa. And all that's happened is, who's holding which, who has which role. And that, like you said, that feels good to the people that are now the abusers, but you're just continuing that cycle. And if you look at it, like you said, from a holistic standpoint, you didn't help anything, Chief. Like you went and made it. Now you're the bad guy. That's what you changed, is you're the villain now. And they're, I guess, the good guys, or or at least the victims of your villainy. And so I was very happy to see that you're doing this type of thing. Now, you had mentioned polarization in your if not in that, then I think in one of the videos about theory of enchantment. Do you think that polarization in our society is possibly a feature and not a bug? Meaning that, like, the people leading these various political movements and activist groups and things like that, whether wittingly or unwittingly, they don't actually want to find common ground. They kind of want to radicalize their followers and create boogeymen out of their opponents so that they can keep everyone at each other's throats and more easily manipulate others. Again, not even necessarily realizing that's what they're doing. Or do you think that this is truly like a bug, like people don't want to do this?
This is a good question. I think that there's some people who don't want to do it and end up doing it. And then I think that for others, like, the market rewards it, especially on Twitter. If the market rewards polarization financially or otherwise, then that's what you're going to do, because it, quite frankly, feeds your family and gives you status. And so that's what you're going to do, and you're going to do it with glee, actually. So I think that there's something that has to be worked out with regard to that market effect, that market aspect, and I'm not quite sure like how to sort of fix that or compete with that, which is ironic because I just started a business, but so we'll see.
If only someone would just, put together something to try to help people figure out how to do this.
Exactly. But at the same time, it's also human nature. So it's not just like market forces. It's like, I don't know if you're into Game of Thrones. I don't know if you watched it. But
yes.
Okay, so I think this was the thing that was the one teaching moment that came away from the very botched 8th season was Khaleesi's turning into, in the name of social justice, she turned into an oppressor, right? Yep. And I don't think that wasn't a market force thing. Capitalism didn't exist back then. I think it's a function of human nature. And so it is incumbent upon us as human beings to be aware of our nature and to try to temper the excesses, the negative excesses of our impulses that lend themselves to that. And I think that that's the larger thing what's going on is a human development thing, not a whether you're unwittingly or deliberately doing it or not.
Yeah, and the market in many ways is an extension of human nature. It's human nature played out in sort of this kind of mass, human nature is saying, I'm going to buy this here because it's cheaper. The exact same thing is cheaper here than there. That's human nature playing out, trying to find the best deal. There are two things I agree with what you just said, that, people are, perfect example, Khaleesi, Daenerys, she right now I'm trying not to think of all the things that were wrong with that season. But Daenerys, she went from, at the beginning of the story, she was, they were trying to kill her. The Baratheons were trying to kill her. She gets married away to a guy who's raping her, and she over time strengthens herself and becomes a champion of the oppressed, doing some pretty brutal stuff along the way, but she was doing it to bad people, quote unquote. Right. And then all of a sudden you come all the way full circle where she's just burning the largest city in the known world and killing pretty much everyone. And then, pretty much saying to Jon, who apparently became thick-headed in the last season, that, we're going to do this to Winterfell next, and then to Dorne, and then everywhere else. And he's just like, you're my queen. And so the other thing I agree with you with is that they completely botched that season and most of season 7. First of all, Jon kills Daenerys. Total side note here. Jon kills Daenerys. Why did and then the Unsullied presumably capture him? Why did the Dothraki not fight the Unsullied to free their new Khal? Because he's their new Khal. He killed the Khaleesi. He's the Khal. He's now their leader. Why did that not happen?
I don't think that at that point was really a thing.
A thing anymore? Yeah. Fair enough. I mean, they've already gone across the world, and
they were on ships throwing up. They'd never been on ships before. It totally messed up their entire worldview. I don't think
that's you know what? That's a good point. They just fought zombies. They're not worried about their archaic social structure anymore. Exactly. That's a good point. And I'm less angry now. I'm still angry. I'm still angry, but I'm less angry. So in the spirit of making human connections, finding common ground, and not treating people as political abstractions, who would you consider the worst enemy of the theory of enchantment? And how do we destroy them?
Oh my goodness. You know what? This is that personality that I love, I have to say. You're awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you for making me laugh. I'll say with the caveat of again, the theory of enchantment has a very specific framework for criticizing people. So it was supposed to be appreciative inquiry, and you talk about what you value and you criticize in order to because you actually care about that person. So all that being said, I don't know if this is the biggest. I mean, but if I were to look at politics on both the left and
I love that you're trying to figure out who your biggest enemy is. But anyway, go ahead.
It's not an enemy thing. It's not it's just different ways it's different paradigms of viewing the world, right?
Right.
I'm in this space where I don't really view them as my enemy.
No, I understand. That's why I love that you're painting yourself to do this. Anyway.
But I'd say I find it problematic. I'll start with the left. I find do you know who Robin DiAngelo is?
I want to say I've heard that name, but not enough to actually know.
Robin DiAngelo is someone who sort of works in anti-bias training. But she coined the term white fragility. And she is basically this entire philosophy of how to combat racism, which is very much not the theory of enchantment. It's very much is basically you have to tell white people to hold still while I hit you, essentially. That's the philosophy, and then the white people have to essentially say, yes, please keep hitting me. I acknowledge my sins and my contribution to white
My
supremacy.
original sin, with no hope of redemption. Also,
Yeah, although that's what I always like to point out when people make that comparison is that it's not like original sin because original sin has actually a redemptive clause in it.
yeah.
But so that whole model, which is actually pretty pervasive in certain sectors of society, it's affected a lot of educational departments, it's affected a lot of anti-bias and like diversity trainings. That type of philosophy is very dangerous and has that, I would call it the Khaleesi effect for the sake of like, shortening what we're talking about. It creates the Khaleesi effect in which people become the oppressor in the name of trying to
Fight for the oppressed.
fight for the oppressed. And the problem with one of the things that underpins that is another sort of flaw in thinking, which is this notion that if you are oppressed, are we allowed to curse on this show or no?
You can say whatever you want on the show. Well, except you don't advocate for anyone to be killed, but I think we're good on that.
Okay.
Sort of like rape, murder, like that kind of thing. Yes, you can say whatever you want.
None of that. Okay. So there's this flaw in this sort of Robin DiAngelo model of thinking that if you are oppressed, then there's no way that you can be an asshole. But it turns out that if you are oppressed, you can also be oppressed and also be a bad person. Right? These two things aren't mutually exclusive.
Yep.
There's this flaw in thinking that if you are oppressed, then you sort of fit into this box of good person, and the person who's oppressing you is bad person. And really, that's not how the human condition works. It's never.
Right.
That's not who we are as human beings. And so, what Dr. DiAngelo does by reducing people to their skin color, ironically, is essentially creating a framework in which human beings are reduced to what she believes to be the essence of their skin color, which doesn't make any sense. And that creates that Khaleesi effect. So that's what I would criticize on the left. Especially it's important to me because I am a person of color and like it really like affects the way, like it affects me personally. And like if I have people going around thinking of me as like a political abstraction or like a category as opposed to a fully functioning complex human being, then they're also going to treat me in weird ways, and then I'm gonna have to like call them out, but in the spirit of the theory of enchantment, not in the spirit of
call out their behavior and why it's wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The spirit of law.
Now I can imagine it's cathartic though. I mean, I am painfully white as this light is helping demonstrate this LED light. I don't know why I have an LED light on me. I glow in the dark. So I am extremely, extremely white. I am Jewish, but I'm also like, no one knows I'm Jewish unless I tell them, which I do often. I am very extreme about my.
Again, you see your like subline. So.
Yeah, exactly. I'm visibly. When I was a kid, I was like platinum white hair. I look like a Hitler Youth poster candidate. Like, I mean, I'm very, 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 very white. So I obviously don't know what it's like to be a person of color. I can imagine that it is very cathartic, especially if you have been dealing with both in overt and covert ways, dealing with being treated like a lesser person. Not that you're being chained and enslaved or anything like that, but just you're existing in the same world as others, but it's noticeable that you're being treated differently on a sort of a macro scale. I can imagine it would be cathartic now to get to play a little part in acting that way towards an entire, treating all white people as an abstraction and making these generalizations. And if any white person comes along to say, well, I'm not like that, you go, oh, I'm not like that. And like make fun of that and, create these spaces where I watch it. And I used to get upset. And now I laugh because I'm like, they're having fun with this. Like, white people do X, Y, Z. And you know me, I post the white people jokes because for the same reason I post jokes in general. I just think they're funny. And I'll get people go, I'm white and I put salt in my chicken, and I'm like, oh, why do I put salt in my chicken? Like, I mean, I get it. I get why it's funny, and I get why it can be cathartic on like a, you've been putting me through this, or not you, but the white people, quote unquote, or this society, including black people that help enforce it, but that's a whole other subject, have been putting me through this, and now I get a chance just to kind of dig at you. But it speaks to what happens if this individual ends up in a position of power? Do they suddenly go, well, I've had my fill of that. Now I'm going to spread joy and love and equality. And I fear that that's maybe not what's going to happen. Do you have that same fear that I do?
Yeah, I don't think necessarily that people that are making white people jokes about cooking and seasoning fit into this category. I mean, I do sometimes make passing comments about that.
So that was just to be clear, that was just an example of like that. Well, I don't do that, but saying white people, like you said,
what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's like a general way of thinking and being and existing in the world. If you go too far, if you become too comfortable with that way of thinking.
Yeah.
Then if you're not careful, when you do find yourself in a position of power, you can become totalitarian. And the other thing is that we as a society don't understand, we think of power as a very simple thing. We think of power almost like as being defined by firepower. So you have the power to enforce, something. But power is actually, I think, much more complicated than that. And I would say that Dr. King and James Baldwin both viewed power in much more metaphysical ways than simply saying, I have a gun and I can enforce this. And they would have argued that racists were actually the victims of their own makings, essentially, which is the type of language that you don't really hear today.
I was going to say, you do not hear that.
Obviously, they will say that racists are engaging in a power imbalance, and so you need to take the power back, and they are on a certain level, but on a metaphysical level, which is another dimension and different way of thinking about all these things, it changes the way, James Baldwin famously said in a debate that he argued that it's in some ways much worse for the racist who presumably loves his wife and loves his kids and still sees fit to go attack and beat up a young black woman. He argued that it was arguably worse for the soul of that person than it was for the person being persecuted, because there's something far more damaging internally in that racist person that has to be dealt with and has to be healed. And that's a totally different way of thinking about power and thinking about how we view I guess the ability to do something, which is the definition of power, right? So, so that's something that I've thought about before a lot, actually.
Well, that's interesting, because I tend to look at so if you look at the societal issues and you distill them down to, if you were thinking of a family instead of a society. So instead of 320 million people or 7 billion people or whatever, think about, a couple dozen people living together as a family. These things start to just look like run-of-the-mill toxic codependent relationships. And so using that same, extrapolation, you could also say that, so giving your example, the abuser, the person who is, being the presumably the one who's benefiting the most from this toxic relationship, in many ways they're the most tortured one of all, because they're doing all of these things to make up for either great anxieties and fears that they have, feelings of inadequacy and all of these other things. And yes, that doesn't excuse what they're doing, and it needs to stop, and the way that they do these things needs to change, and the people that are being forced into this need to be able to disassociate from them so that they don't have to deal with that. But that doesn't change the fact that that person is really, probably, like you said, possibly worse off than anyone else in terms of who they are inside, how tortured they are inside. And like you were saying, power, Paul Gordon, who's a guest of mine regularly, he talks about the reality of power, that there are many different types of power, and force power is just one of them. Me being able to point a gun at someone and go, you do this or I'll kill you, or me being able to, show an army to someone and say, I will bomb the crap out of everyone you care about unless you do this. That's one type of power, and it's the most overstated one, because there's also, if I have the ability, and I forget the labels he uses, but if I have the ability to, in talking to you, change your mind so that not only are you doing the thing that I want you to do, but you want to do it. I'm not forcing you to do it at gunpoint. This is now a thing that you feel just as passionately as me. That is power. If I can change, public opinion to kind of almost like societally pressure you, or for lack of a better word, peer pressure you into doing something, that's not quite as good as getting to convince you to do it, but it's still better than pointing a gun at you, because you still feel like this is something you should be doing. So those things are in my mind, more powerful than the power we tend to think of, force power, martial power.
Right. Yeah, and again, it's just two totally different paradigms of viewing the way the world works. Someone
Right.
actually had a conversation with me the other day, going back to quantum physics. They explained it like someone who views physics through the lens of a Newtonian model versus someone who sees it through the lens of quantum physics. So the Newtonian model is, and I'm bastardizing this. So.
Yeah, for the idiots out there who don't know like the difference.
I'm one of them, so
oh, okay,
so this is just like a basic way to think about it. But like,
okay.
Newtonian is like the physical, like this computer is physically in front of me, right? Like I can touch it, if I drop it, I break it, whatever. That's the Newtonian level of it. But the quantum level of physics is like the energy within the universe, right?
Yeah.
It's going, and it's going much more deeper than the physical manifestation of what's happening in front of you. And that's the problem I have with Robin DiAngelo's model, is that her model is only about the physical appearance, essentially, of the person standing in front of you and the implication of that. Allegedly, as opposed to the energy within the person, the things that have contributed to the person being who they are, and how that informs what they're doing to themselves and to me, and then now multiply that on a societal level. So that's, but I do want to bring up my problems with the right in regards to this. I don't want to just focus on the left, because the right does this too. And I would say, like, I used to write for Truth Revolt, which was a magazine that like Ben Shapiro had headed up. So I used to work for Ben Shapiro on the Israel side.
Right.
And I think that both, to a certain extent, Ben Shapiro, and to a greater extent, Candace Owens, represents the same phenomenon on the right. Because what they do is they make these sweeping claims about how the left wants to destroy us all. The left as this, again, political.
Right. This like, Leviathan.
This sort of, like, it's ironic that they criticize Ta-Nehisi Coates. Because I also criticize Ta-Nehisi Coates, but
I know we've had a lot of back and forth with Ta-Nehisi Coates, yeah.
Yes, but it's ironic that they criticize them, because one of the things that they were critical of, if I remember correctly, is in his essay about Donald Trump being the first white president, he describes whiteness as this like cosmic force in the world. But it's like that's how they describe the left. They describe the left as if it were this cosmic force in the world, like the media. They are the media.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
They have enormous platforms with millions of people following them. They're acting as if they don't have power. They have power to influence, and they are the media. And so they too reduce people on the left to these cookie cutter, pigeonholed, mindless drones, when
this monolith, like Sauron or something. Yep.
Totally, like, the left, in my opinion, is far more interesting and nuanced in many ways than the picture that they depict.
Oh, yeah.
So they too have contributed to this force in society that's just like not allowing us to deal with each other's humanities, and instead in empowering us and encouraging us to just reduce one another to objects instead of subjects.
Well, and I agree 100%. And specifically with Ben Shapiro and Candace Owens, in some ways they're presenting themselves by virtue of their identities as sort of a counter abstraction. So it's like, well, I'm a Jew and I'm conservative, or I'm a black woman and let me explain why the Democrat Party is a plantation that we should flee from, and how in no way is that hyperbolic at all to compare a political party to like chattel slavery.
This is one of my biggest critiques of Candace Owens is like, you're comparing a political party of the 21st century to plantation life, like, and no one sees a problem with this.
That's a rough, like, that's a rough conspiracy, especially if I have to believe, maybe I'm wrong, I have to believe that if Ben Shapiro tried to unironically compare like the Democratic Party to Auschwitz, that I'd have to think that there'd be some backlash. Would there be people out there like, yeah, I totally agree with him? Yes. But by and large, would he get way more flack than she's getting for comparing. Maybe I'm fooling myself. Maybe I'm wrong, but I have to think that he'd be getting just a little more flack for comparing it to Shoah than Shoah's the Holocaust for this. Than Candace is getting comparing it to slavery. But I don't know. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know anymore. As I'm saying it, maybe all my friends, half my Facebook friends feed would come out and say, yes, of course, this is exactly like the gas chambers. I don't know what to think anymore.
I don't know. I just am baffled by what people get away with intellectually these days. So, or not intellectually. So.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, you know what isn't comparable to the Holocaust? Anchor FM. So, guys, are you thinking of podcasting? Well, let me tell you something. If you are thinking of making a Anchor will be thrilled at this plug, I'm sure. Anchor is the easiest way to make a podcast. Anchor gives you everything you need in one place for free, which you can use right from your phone or your computer. They have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast so it sounds great. They will distribute the podcast for you so it can be heard everywhere, from Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and many more, pretty much everywhere. You can easily make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership, which is a big deal. We are actually making money for the first time, even though we don't have tens of thousands of listeners yet. Don't do SoundCloud. If you are not an already famous person and you were thinking of podcasting, then be sure to download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. And that is my contractually obligated plug. Now, Chloe, speaking of podcasts, you recently started a podcast, didn't you?
I did, yes. I got to get on that, actually. But no, I have a podcast called The Theory of Enchantment.
Guilting you into podcasting more.
It's called Theory of Enchantment, and I will actually I'm actually going to start talking more about the theory. In the past, I've interviewed really interesting folks.
Yeah.
But I think that my voice I've sort of minimized my voice, and I think that I'm trying to hone in my skills as an educator. So I think it'll be interesting to see how I talk more about the theory and about the teachings and the lessons of the theory. And it's really interesting because the Theory of Enchantment curriculum is super innovative because it uses pop culture as a text to teach insights on the human condition. So instead of studying a Psych 101 textbook, you'll actually study things like Disney's The Lion King. You'll study things like a song by Kendrick Lamar, or a song by John Mayer, a text by James Baldwin, a poem by Maya Angelou, to actually talk about and discuss and unpack these insights into the human condition. So that's
way more relatable.
Yeah. than Psych 101.
Than Psych 101. Yeah. Even to people that are into Psych 101, right. There's gonna be a very small subset of people that are like, Psych 101, way more interesting than Maya Angelou or James Baldwin or Kendrick Lamar or whomever else. So I can imagine that's more relatable. I caught a couple of your podcasts. You interviewed the former white nationalist, the founder of J-Swipe. I found out that I learned this week that there's an app called J-Swipe, exclusive Jewish dating, which would have
just learned that this week.
I just learned that. Listen, I've been out of the dating world for like over a decade, and also let me tell you something. Let me put this on to me. I don't date Jewish. My whole thing, once you go Gentile, you're in the 99th percentile. And but now back to you. But so it was very interesting. I'd like to think that you started this podcast because you started listening to my show, and you thought, wow, that's terrible. I need to make something that hopefully in some small way offsets the horrible things that Spike is doing by making something that is good. Am I correct in that assumption?
That is exactly.
Okay,
that
perfect.
was my thinking.
Good.
Podcast.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. So I didn't realize that you're going to try to switch up how you relate to the people during the podcast, be less of a, I guess, interviewer and more of where you're having conversation, or? Yeah,
I think I'm gonna just try to talk about my thoughts more,
It's tough. It's tough. It is tough. I like talking about how I think about stuff, but when you have someone on, you naturally just want to ask them questions and be like, yeah, that's a great point. or I don't know, maybe I don't agree with that. But I'm learning. If you watch my first few, don't. But if you did watch my first few episodes, I'm just like, that's a good point. Wow, I never thought of it that way. Or I agree with that. And as opposed to like having a conversation. So I'm trying to strike that balance. So you've done how many episodes?
I've done 10 episodes.
Okay, then you will get much better. But I thought you were good. I thought you were good. But yes, it is difficult to find that balance between just being like a reporter putting a microphone in someone's face and being like a Larry King who's, the interview's half about him, as much as it is about the person. Yeah, it's tough. It's tough because you want to be somewhere in between those.
I want to like experiment with the latter one, So, yeah, I want to try that for real.
Cool. Well, it's good. Cool. You could have the founder of My Fellow Americans on, and that would be something. And then you could just ask me questions, and then I could talk. That could be an episode where you don't try to do that, and you just let me talk.
Well, you know what? I would love to have you on Theory of Enchantment, Spike. I mean, I don't know if we could get into all of the debates because I feel like it's not necessarily on topic per se for the Theory of Enchantment, but we could figure something out. Like, definitely.
We could.
You're a very funny person.
Thank you, and I am a fan of this idea of finding your enemies and naming and shaming them. And
but I don't think I shamed them.
People,
tell me if I did, but
people who disagree with Theory of Enchantment so fragile. There's a hashtag.
Yes.
Although, yeah. So okay. Now, Chloé, there are one of my favorite places on the internet is the comments section of your Facebook posts, where I try to reside as much as possible. Basically, I think you're in a similar situation as me, where you have cultivated a largely conservative following, and or at least they're maybe slightly overrepresented from the general public. We should say, and they have become exasperated, downright apoplectic, if you will, at the idea that you have nuanced opinions and are not essentially a Tucker Carlson clone. This is not a segue into a question. I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you for your commenters.
Well, here's the thing. I actually recently told someone that, I actually told Dave Rubin that if anything, I'm I don't really like the political labels, but I'm definitely like a former right winger, sort of transitioning into a centrist.
Right.
Not a center left person, whatever that means. I don't know, but
you're not ready to say what you're becoming, but I know what you're becoming.
What am I becoming? Tell me.
You're becoming one of me. You're becoming one of me.
I am not an anarchist.
Oh no, you're. It's happening. You're not now. Okay, so this is like 2014, Chloé. I'm not an anarchist. No, you're definitely not right now.
No.
Anyway, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you, and you're not being an anarchist.
But I will say this about my followers. I love them. I respect them. Sometimes they drive me crazy. And if it's anyone that I'm trying to affect with the Theory of Enchantment, but it's not just them. It's like there are conservatives on my wall that go apoplectic. In my opinions, there are also liberals that on my wall that go apoplectic.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can make all of them angry and also hopefully make them think.
Make everyone angry.
Yeah, but I like to tell them that I'm not a. What is it? When they ask me if I'm right wing or left wing, I say I am not a bird.
I like that. I like that.
So yeah, I think that the world is much more interesting than these questions. Are you right wing or are you left wing? It's so much more interesting, and it's sad that we haven't come to a place societally or culturally where we can transcend those labels. So,
I agree.
I'm hoping to contribute to society in such a way that does happen.
You're doing your best, and I appreciate that. And in the meantime, I'm thoroughly enjoying the comments. I often come just to experience the comments and I know what they'll be, which is the best part of it. So it's
predict them at this point.
I can predict with a pretty high degree of certainty, when you'll post something and it'll mention the Palestinians. And they'll be like, there is no Palestinians. You show me their constitution. So, Chloé, there are competing theories as to whether or not we should reach out to people with the most abhorrent views like Nazis, or whether we should, shame them and try to, destroy them and whatever, whether we should be, reaching out to them and not treat them like evil caricatures so that they can realize we aren't evil caricatures and maybe they, shouldn't be Nazis. I think you seem to believe we should reach out to them at least to a point. The argument against that obviously is that by giving Nazis and people like that any kind of space or platform, you're also giving them the opportunity to spread their message and influence more people or normalize their beliefs or anything like that. And some would say, that they could spread their message and influence more people, possibly even me. So what do you think about that argument? And then also, to what degree do you worry that I could become a Nazi?
So Daryl Davis was a famous guy because he literally got over 200 white nationalists to lead the movement and give up their robes. And he literally just did it by talking to them. So
that's a very powerful data point in your favor.
So you just talked to he just talked to them over very long periods of time, like years and years and years, and eventually just like wore them down, I guess, by just talking.
It's like,
to
okay,
them.
fine, you're a person,
right? And they eventually left, and so I guess my question would be, as a data point, how many white nationalists have left the movement from the strategy of ignoring them, or ostracizing them,
threatening to punch them,
versus the Daryl Davis model? I don't know the answer to that question. It's possible that maybe some have, maybe.
I'm sure it takes all kinds. Yeah.
Left. Maybe it's a combination, of things. But that data point of Daryl Davis really sticks out with me. Also, Dia Khan, who has a famous documentary on Netflix called Meet the Right, where she also talks to white nationalists, and she has an incredible interview with the British guy whose name I forgot. What's it called? I forgot his name, but look up podcast.
Russell Brand.
Russell Brand.
Russell Brand. Yep.
So she has an incredible interview with him, which I think is was certainly homework for me when I was developing the theory of enchantment.
It's really good. Yeah, it's really good.
So good, and it sort of unpacks how and why people become white nationalists, especially how a lot of military people are coming back, being super depressed and traumatized, and then being exploited by this movement. So these are often our veterans who are being essentially, I would say, stolen from us and into these movements. And so unpacking that, and she really speaks about it eloquently, is critical to learning how to get people out of the movement. And the theory of enchantment is actually going to be used in anti-extremist organizations to help people who have expressed a desire to want to leave that movement. So even the theory of enchantment is actually involved in the very early stages, but involved in trying to, combat extremist movements, but in a very love-focused way. So maybe for other people, again, punching them in the face might be very cathartic and emotionally comfortable. Don't get arrested, but it might, and I get that. I don't think I would necessarily, I don't think judgment is what I would dish out for that, but I would say be mindful. This is, again, the Newtonian versus the quantum, right? The Newtonian view is this person in front of me is a white supremacist. White supremacists are evil. Punch the white supremacist, right? Right. The quantum model is, what are the factors within this individual's life that got him to where he is today, and how can I unpack those factors in a way that will help him to grow and eventually move out of the movement. It's just two different ways of viewing, and I happen to subscribe to that second view. Right.
And of course, caring for your safety first and foremost. You don't go into
if you're punching a Nazi, I'm not sure if you're concerned.
Well, no, but what I mean is okay, so you don't go to a cross burning and go, hey guys, maybe this is a bit much.
No. If you want to go crazy, Daryl Davis did that shit. He showed up. I'm not recommending this.
We're not recommending this, but man,
big guy. He's a pretty big guy, so I wouldn't recommend this. But Daryl Davis literally showed up for years at white nationalist rallies and just talked to people and eventually over 200 of them left. I don't know what that says, but I know it says something.
It definitely says something. You have, first of all, you know what it says is the cojones, the chutzpah of this man. This is a self-assured man to show up to a white nationalist rally as an obvious black man.
He's like, I don't get it. Tell me about what you think.
Tell me why you're doing that. Is
and then we'll shake your hand afterwards and be like, all right, I'll see you at the next one.
Yeah, I'll see you at the next one. Okay, yeah, I think you're wrong, but we'll talk later. Like,
yeah.
That is impressive. I would say, so here's my recommendation, because I would say, maybe not the day. I don't want people walking away from this going like, well, Nazis are people too. I'm gonna go hang out at their thing. So don't do that. I would not recommend that. Okay. My recommendation would be, if you are going to reach out to them, you do so in a space you're going to feel comfortable in. And apparently for him, that was a cross burning. He was comfortable in that space. So maybe a place that you feel comfortable. But yeah, no, it's,
or you can just like work with organizations that do that stuff professionally. So
that's another thing, but it's
organizations that exist in that space and that are actually helping because the thing is, I've been to a lot of conferences on extremism, and people don't realize that extremism is like alcoholism. Like, you have to go through like a 12-step program to get out of it. And so if you can volunteer for organizations that are helping people get out of those movements, that's another way that you can contribute to bettering society.
Yeah. And it speaks to the fact that I am not saying Nazism's wrong. The Klan is wrong. These things are wrong. They're unequivocally wrong. It speaks to something that these are people who obviously think they're doing something right, and yet when a black man comes up, a good number of them actually, even in that moment, felt comfortable communicating with this person. And it says that these groups are not Sauron. These groups are not the yeah. Thank you. I try to pop culture, like, because Tolkien is pop culture. 200-year-old story is pop culture, or 100-year-old story. These are not the monoliths that we create. And there are certainly bad actors in them, just like there's bad actors everywhere. But a lot of them are scared. Like, a lot of them are doing it because they are scared of this caricature that's been created of them. The Mexicans and the blacks and the Muslims are coming to rape their women and to erase their identity. And they're going to make us do this and do that. And we have to stop them. We have to band together. We're a dwindling minority of people, and we have to band together and fight against them. And that narrative has so many problems with it. And it's clearly false. But just seeing a black person want to be friends with them, for a good number of them, is going to be enough for them to be like, oh, well, I didn't know you wanted to be friends. Now, for a lot of them, no, but yeah. Yeah,
I should also give context, I think. Like, this is my, again, holisticness, right? Like, my thinking on this was affected. It's not just thinking about, it's thinking about all forms of extremism, right? So, like, I volunteer in Brooklyn for an organization called Children of Promise, which mentors kids whose parents are incarcerated. The likelihood that they will become incarcerated is very high.
Through the roof, yeah, yeah.
And so they need structures in place so they can have mentorships where we basically essentially tell them that we believe in them, and this is why we demand excellence in them. But that's the same. It's interesting because it's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
The same exact thing. So I know. Okay, I have mentored, I have tutored little kids, boys in particular, and the likelihood of them joining a gang is so high because of the missing structures in their family, right? Yep. And what's crazy about that is that for some of the young white boys who are susceptible of joining white nationalist groups, these two totally different groups, one is a bunch of, let's say, poor white kids, and one is a bunch of poor black kids, the same factors are at work.
Yep.
The same factors of fatherlessness, the same factors of a feeling of abandonment, social abandonment, the same factors of isolation are at work. And see, that's that quantum physics level of analysis, right? That's not like, this speaks to my problem that I have on the right? Because the right's problem, the left's problem, is that the intersectional left has no way of dealing with white nationalism in the way that we've been talking about, right?
Right.
It doesn't view white supremacy as like alcoholism, which requires a 12-step program to get out.
Right.
But the right also doesn't understand that when it comes across young Black kids who may be acting out, who may be acting in a way that's aggressive or harmful, they will be dismissive of them, and they will say crazy things that are
ghetto
super
thugs.
harmful,
Yep.
super caricaturing.
Yep.
And that is the exact same model of what the left is doing for white supremacists, right? And that isn't to say that, like, this is not about comparing and contrasting. This is not about saying that, like, if you think that you're a supremacist by virtue of your skin color, then what you are doing is better or worse than a kid who wants to go bang up another community because that community is being repped by another gang, right? This isn't about comparing and contrasting the lack of ethics in both of these slivers of communities, right? It's about trying to unpack where they come from, where they stem from, and trying to put in place a model that can heal and also can prevent, right? Because again, going back to conversations around movies or films like When They See Us, how can we actually combat the punitive nature of the way we think about how to deal with crime or how to deal with bad behavior at a holistic level? So the same thing that I'm saying, which is applicable to dealing in some cases with some white supremacists, is the same thing that is applicable, or preventing white supremacists from actually sprouting up of communities, is the same thing that's applicable to why we should be talking about mentoring these young Black kids that are in situations through no fault of their own. We should be shoring them up. We should be telling them we believe in them, right? Because we know that the outcome will be better, and the right does not do that. I was just on Ben Shapiro's website. He has a list of retractions, but like halfway down the list, it's like stuff I've said that the left took out of context. And one of them was basically saying that, like, if you have an EBT card and you're sagging your pants and you're wearing a fitted cap, this was a tweet he said a few years ago, but he just re-justified the tweet last year. And he said, if you have all of this, your likelihood of success is 0%. And then he said, the left didn't understand this. They called me racist, but there are a bunch of white people that fit this description, so the left is being racist, blah, blah, blah. And my whole
but it's
thing
still wrong. It's still not...
This is problematic, Ben. That's not the issue with this tweet.
Right, it's not just about that skin. Yeah.
First, like what you appreciates. So if you can see value, if you can see human worth, if you can see potential in that kid that you just described, then the likelihood, and you invest in that potential, then the likelihood that they will be successful is actually not 0%. But you have to have a worldview that is holistic enough to see that and to make you desire to invest in that. So it's any community. I could talk about a Black kid in the inner city of Chicago. I could talk about a white kid in opioid-infested Virginia. I could talk about a Hispanic kid who's dealing with various issues. This is the human condition, right? This is how the human condition works. So
and Jordan Peterson talks about this as well, but it's especially with boys, but really just people in general, with girls too. If you take a human being, and as a child they have no direction, they have no idea what they're doing, they've probably been told at least once that they were a mistake, or at least it was or at least even if it wasn't actually said, just the way that they're being treated is as though they were a mistake and an unwanted mistake that the people now fully regret that having made. And now you've got a group, whether it's a gang, an extremist group, or even the military, who goes to them and says, no, you have a purpose. Exactly. We're going to give you a purpose. We have a purpose for you. You have amazing purpose. You're going to protect your people or your country or your neighborhood from these horrible scumbags over there who think all the terrible things about you that we don't believe. And we're going to go and we're going to fight against them. And you know, you're going to, I don't know so much with the white supremacist groups, but definitely with the gangs and with the military, they're like, you're going to profit too. You're going to make something of yourself. You're going to come out of this stronger and better. I'm sure the white supremacist groups and the extremist groups do something. The terrorist groups, Al-Qaeda says, well, when you die, not only do you go to paradise, we give your family money. So, I mean,
Right.
these are people that have no hope, and they're being given hope. But the hope is incredibly toxic, and it's
Right.
going to harm lots and lots of people. But it's the same thing. And I like what you're saying, especially getting them when they're young, so that you don't have to be what's the guy's name again? That went to the Klan rallies.
Oh, Daryl Davis.
Yeah, so you don't have to be like Daryl Davis and go to Klan rallies with adults.
You're
Get them when
doing
they're
it.
kids. Get them.
Let me get him out.
Yeah, really, exactly. But imagine if you can get them as kids, where they might call you the N-word or something, but you don't really fear for your life as much.
Right.
You know, this is a place that you can actually get them. So, Chloe, I have to ask you.
Yes.
You've been following me for years now, and yet somehow you are still not an anarchist.
No.
Why?
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 Just, doesn't really speak to me. Honestly.
But I'm speaking to you.
If I were to give you like I was actually thinking about this before I did this interview. Like, you are basically like the free folk in Game of Thrones.
Yes. Yes.
Right? That's
Yes.
like the community that you represent, right?
Yes.
I respect the free folk tremendously, but I actually like believe in the state and like in the existence of the state, and I don't think it has. I think that we have a difference of opinions in terms of like the ethics of the existence of the state. So I think like big picture and like to summarize it, that's why I'm not an anarchist. I mean,
Fair
again,
enough.
I'm a Zionist, so like
It's kind of hard to be an anarcho-Zionist. Yes,
Yeah.
that's fair. Fair enough. Fair enough. And in the spirit of the theory of enchantment, I will agree to disagree with you and continue to have an open dialogue with you.
Thank you.
Because I know that we haven't all ascended yet, and
also-
we haven't all reached ascendancy,
I also
which
think
I achieved a few days ago when I changed my mind on a couple of things, and I've now reached the pinnacle of both knowledge and humility. And
yes, you are like Dharma. You're there, man.
I am there. I've got the multiple. You can't see them because you're where you are, but I do have the multiple hands and the flowy hand thing.
That's
I forgot my question.
That's great terminology. To refer to Buddhist,
The hand thing.
spirituality. I also just think that like our desire as a species to have expressions of the collective is very rooted in our DNA, and that you can see that in like sports, you can see that in the existence of countries. So I think it's like, now just to say that it's natural doesn't mean it's good. I agree
Right.
that there are excesses of the state, obviously, but I do think that it can be conditioned toward the good.
You know what? Again, we're not all here, but I will say this: I am not, and I think there's a misconception that I think we're all island, that every man is an island, and that's certainly not the case. Like you said, sports, people join leagues and join teams, and they play against each other, and now hardcore anarchists will say, well, that's a conditioning from the state, and no, it's not. It's not an abstraction. It's hundreds of thousands of years of biological evolution where we seek out patterns in order to protect ourselves from dying, and now it expresses itself in far more mundane ways, like your bowling league or your chess club or whatever. And so I think that there are natural hierarchies. I think that the actual state, like forced association through government, I think that there are better ways to do the things that we all agree need to be achieved, well, most of us agree need to be achieved. Not like those people, but the people that we agree to disagree with. But anyway, we have time. You have time. We have time. We're gonna have conversations. This is holistic. You're not Newtonian, and I'm not gonna treat you like that.
I'm glad that you adopted my vocabulary. That's how you know that the theory of enchantment is working.
Oh, it's real. Listen, I mean, I haven't done the course, but I reading what I've read and listening to what I've listened to, I'm like, yes, this is, yes. I don't do this because my post. I'm like very like, if you think this, then prove yourself right.
Very sarcastic though.
I am, but it's kind of like a passive aggressive sarcasm where I'm like, oh yeah, my thing is like, I'm like, well, prove you actually believe this by, and I create some absurdist construct.
Right. Yeah.
That you have to agree with. But I'm right. But I am right. Just to be clear. So, Chloe, before I give you the floor to give your final thoughts, probably the most important part of this show right now, I'm going to give you this opportunity to explain to our viewers and listeners exactly how much better I am than Dave Rubin. And yes, specific reasons, specific reasons as to why that is. Take as much time as you need.
Listen, I love Dave Rubin. He was so gracious to have me on his show. So I feel like, you both have your qualities. You both.
I don't like where this is going. I don't.
I think that you're much more funny than you're funnier than Dave Rubin. So. I think you make that was in studio, but I think for me this is just a personal thing. Like if the person interviewing me is funny, it makes me way more comfortable, and it like makes me take it less seriously, which is great because I give my best material when I don't take it that seriously. So. Yeah,
and you should definitely not take this show seriously at all. No, I certainly don't. Let me rephrase this, and maybe in a different way that's more helpful. How many Dave Rubins would it take to make a Spike Cohen?
I think 20.
Yes, good. Yeah. I'm going with that. I'm good with that. I'm officially 20 times better than Dave Rubin. Yeah. And my ratings will reflect that.
Not what I said, but you feel free to interpret.
It's how I took it.
Yeah.
And I live in my truth. And which I hate that phrase, my truth. But in this moment, it's perfect. This moment, I am in my truth. It makes perfect sense. It perfectly fits with my beliefs right now. So it's definitely that is. I will take that, and my ratings will clearly reflect that reality. Shortly, pretty much with this episode moving forward. Chloe, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. I have had so much fun having you on, and I'm so glad that you could take the time to do this. And I just want to give you a chance before I let you go to give any final thoughts of anything, and take as much time as you need. Any final thoughts that you have that you feel like we didn't get to address fully, that you'd like to fully flesh out, anything that you would like to plug, anything that you would like to tell people about, whatever you want to say. You can say anything that you want to say. Chloé Valdary, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Spike. So for those of you listening to this interview, as you know, I have a curriculum online that I'm selling. So the normal price is actually $750, and you get a year's worth of access to the curriculum. But if you type in coupon name Spike Cohen, all caps, no space.
No space.
The curriculum will cost $360, which is $30 a month. So that's a discount I will be giving to Spike Cohen's listeners. And I hope you enroll and enjoy. I think you'll get a lot out of the program. It's certainly been a self-authoring process for me to actually put together the program. And I hope that you learn as much as I have learned and grow as much as I'm trying to grow from engaging with this curriculum.
Thank you so much. And thank you for that generous discount for our viewers. Spike Cohen, all caps, no space. Do not put a space. Swear to God, do not put a space in there. And thank you again for joining us. Guys, thank you again for tuning in to my fellow Americans. It has been an absolute pleasure, and I'm glad you could experience that pleasure with me, Spike Cohen and Chloe. Be sure to tune in tomorrow, Thursday night, for the Writer's Block, where Matt Wright is going to be interviewing someone. I don't know who, but he'll be interviewing that person, and it will be amazing. And so be sure to tune into that. Tune in Friday for the Shabbat episode of Mr. America, the Bearded Truth by the he's a Gentile, but I'm calling it a Shabbat episode with Jason Lyon. Have a great weekend, and then tune in next Monday for Mr. America, the Bearded Truth, the non-Shabbat, the fully Gentile episode of Mr. America, the Bearded Truth with Jason Lyon. Tune in next Tuesday for the Muddy Waters of Freedom, where Matt Wright and I parse through the week's events with the hilarity and innocence of a child. That's what I do. And then tune in again next Wednesday, where I will be having Brent DeRitter, who is with the Libertarian Party of North Carolina, and is also going to be doing something called the Liberty Loop, where he is taking his family on a houseboat journey around the country somehow. I'm not sure how a houseboat goes around the country. If you don't know, be sure to tune in. Don't forget the code. And again, stop lying, Denny's. Hashtag stop lying, Denny's. And I will see you next week. And God bless you.
Outside.